My first memory of the forest took place when I was 5 years old. My room at home had a window that framed a pine forest behind my house. I used to lay there for hours as the sun would shine through my window, whilst the needles and branches made it dance across my room. The tree gave direction and poetry to the light as it listened to the howling wind. Like a ballet dancer who tentatively explodes into expression and then contracts with power and grace. I often wonder what it thought of me, lying in my pine bed, cocooned in my blanket, blissfully disconnected from the harshness of the tree's reality. There was one spot I particularly liked in that forest. A small river trickled past, weaving between the roots and cascading over broken branches. It had created a gorge that meandered between the trees, allowing the ferns and reeds to give colour to the floor. One day I returned and everything had changed. The trees had gone, the speckled light had been replaced with a complete intrusion of brightness. What had felt like a small spot had now been opened for hundreds of metres in all directions. The life it sustained seemed to have vanished, and the border between something and nothing had been crossed. This project finds itself at that boundary between forests and human resource. The Scots pine is the world's most distributed pine tree. Its range spans from the west coast of Scotland to the Pacific coast of Russia and can be found as far north as Arctic Circle Norway to the Mediterranean coast of Spain in the south. Each year, the tree will sequester 10 kilograms of CO2, which when scaled to the 218,000 hectares of UK Scots pine forest, means they sequester 5.8 million tonnes of CO2 per year, 3% of the UK's total CO2 emissions in 2020. This figure seems small, however the Scots pine only accounts for 0.9% of the UK's landmass. At present, the forestry industry consider 35% of the tree as forestry waste, which is later burnt in the biofuels industry, releasing the CO2 back into the environment. This is written off by the forestry practice as a circular CO2 economy. But what if we could use this waste within a new building approach that encapsulates the entire tree? This project approaches this question by breaking the Scots pine down into components: the bark, timber, resin, needles, branches and earth, then reutilises these components in an architectural approach that encapsulates the CO2. At present, we fell 1.8 million cubic metres of Scots pine in the UK alone, roughly amounting to 4.5 million tonnes of tree each year. Breaking this into components means that a timber contains 2.9 million tonnes, whilst the bark 0.9 million tonnes, branches and needles both 0.4 million tonnes. By using this waste effectively, it encapsulates a further 1% of the UK's CO2 emissions in 2020. This video shows the process of working with the resin and earth, as well as reimagining a new interaction between the material devoid of their original use set by the tree. The resin works like a thermo-softening plastic that liquefies at 100 degrees Celsius. During this time, the turpentine begins to vaporize. The traditional method of spinning can be found throughout the timber industry. Here it is used to create an even force distributing the resin on the wall defined by the earth. The fragility of the resin alone makes it a delicate craft. whilst the stacking becomes a method of storage that is utilised throughout the architecture. The components are realised in a matrix of processes and architectures that form the programme of the designed store. Each part feeds the next intervention, ending in a series of proposed stores. Each part of the construction process is an exchange with the forest. The removal of one enables the growth of the other. In the initial part of construction, it requires the setup of mechanisms that build the store. Phase 1, the identification of the site where the trees have reached a maturity in timber density which is around 70 years in the UK. Phase 2, felling the desired trees needed to build cutting platform. Phase 3, the timber platform is built using traditional log cabin techniques that require only an axe. Phase 4, the platform then becomes a space to cut and plank timber ready for drying. And Phase 5, the crane is erected to become the transport mechanism for the timber. The component stores are then combined so that the resin windows enclose the drying spaces whilst increasing heat. The timber stickers then become the shelf supports for seeds and growing trays, and so the interaction between components becomes once again one system. The interaction between the building and surrounding environment means the predominant southwesterly wind flows down through the corridors, whilst the sun pierces through the south side resin windows. The store's position on the site utilises the earth to give a gravity feed of timber into the processing system. At this point in which you see the building, it has stored 200 trees, encapsulating 140 tonnes of CO2. This is equivalent to driving 1.4 million kilometres in your car, whilst also valuing the whole tree as an intelligent resource for the construction industry. The store's connection between industry and timber resource imagines a fusion between the Scots pine components, which become the construction materials for future green buildings, where the non-toxic materials clad internal spaces, linking the forest back to our history, where the tree becomes a place for congregation.